So, we may as well start. So welcome everyone for this unusual meeting of the Dunedin City Council for public hearings. So, firstly we'll start with apologies. I have received none. Does anyone have any? No? Very good. Confirmation of agenda. I move that we accept the agenda as written. We confirm that without additional alteration. Do I have a second for that? Deputy Mayor Lucas. Any comment? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Item number 3. My goodness. Where is it? Number 3. I move the council notes the elected members' interest register as attached and confirms the management plans, plural, seconded Councillor Gilbert. Any comment, any changes? No? Therefore, all those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. And the hearing schedule. So I move the council notes the hearing schedule that you have. Seconded Deputy Mayor Lucas. All in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Submissions. Item number 4. I now invite submitters to speak to their submissions. And the usual story, we have 5 minutes to speak to the submission and then councillors have 5 minutes to answer questions. So we have 1:35. We're nice and early. So I don't know if Chelsea McGaw is here already. Thank you for coming early, because we're ready nice and early. So we'll start with you.
So kia ora, Mayor and councillors, and thank you for fitting me in today. Just before I start, I'd just like you to know I've just come from a really, really cool thing that's happening in Dunedin this week, and it's called ACAP, the Agreement on the Conservation of Albatross and Petrels. So I've just taken a wee break to come and present today, and that's where we've got 13 countries that have all come to Dunedin to talk about protecting seabirds throughout their range across the world. And as you know, Dunedin is one of the wildlife and seabird capitals of New Zealand. So I just thought that was of the world. So I thought that was really cool just to chuck in and let you know that's happening. It's really awesome to see those countries here represented by their diplomats. So today I wanted to do something a little different, and I want you to imagine and visualise a future Dunedin. In this future, Dunedin has become a sponge city where natural processes have been integrated into traditional engineering, creating a city that can weather major storm events and provide long-term climate solutions that also benefit the local community by providing green space and recreational areas that are a haven for Dunedin's ever-increasing biodiversity. No longer is our eco-corridor restricted to merely the town belt, but integrated into all of our city planning. Private developers are incentivised and happy to provide habitat and refuge for the city's thriving indigenous plants and animals when they are building in our great small city. Piped watercourses are no longer hidden underground and a bottleneck for increasing stormwater discharges, but are daylighted, creating important overland flow paths, and these watercourses have become ecosystems in themselves. In the weekends, families have fun searching for indigenous galaxids and coda in our urban waterways, like Kaikorai Stream, and mana whenua are finding it much easier to exercise mahika kai and provide for their whānau from Dunedin's kete or food basket. Our ever-increasing blue-green infrastructure and native plantings throughout the city are helping keeping us a carbon zero city, a title we achieved many years ago, funded appropriately by the council of the day and supported by local businesses, community groups, e-NGOs, tourists and residents alike. Our reliance on unsustainable practices such as fossil fuels are a thing of the past, and our transport network has been designed to incorporate multiple modes of transport safely, with less focus on traditional car transport, and most of our residents are able to choose to walk, bike, scooter and bus via our world-class network. Our city is booming with its wildlife capital status, persevering and growing, and ecotourism has grown to be Dunedin's most prosperous industry, building on the millions that already contributed to the local economy. A walk on the beach with your leashed canine isn't burdened by disappearing sand dunes and bereft of vegetation, but instead you are tripping over the many pakake New Zealand sea lions that have continued to increase on our coasts and now have colony status. And in the evening you can watch hoiho return home. They are now making a remarkable comeback after being on the absolute brink of extinction. Seabirds are continuing to nest here before they travel thousands of kilometres across the globe, and their nests and burrows are not at risk of being invaded by ferrets and feral cats, among other things. No matter where you live in the city, you can walk outside and hear birdsong from our flourishing urban bird population, from tui, kotomako, rio and others. You have to duck to avoid getting knocked out by keraru, with kaka and tieke overflowing from Orokonui and making their home in our many southern rata, panga, matai and other native trees. Stepping outside at dusk, ruru calls echo throughout the city. This is an Otipoti Dunedin which I want my 3 kids and their children to be able to live and thrive in. A Dunedin not strangled by short-term thinking in councillor terms, but focused on long-term goals which provide long-term solutions to difficult and complex issues. The answers are out there and they're in nature. If we look after nature, it will look after us. The jury is already out. The Dunedin community has already said they want Dunedin to be a sustainable, resilient city with less waste, strong biodiversity and a healthy environment. The kind of Dunedin that I have envisioned in this address and that the community have asked for is not a pipe dream. It is achievable, and the long-term plan is where we can start. The purpose of the Local Government Act is to promote social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being of communities. Creating a biodiverse, environmentally sustainable and climate resilient Dunedin ticks all these boxes, and it is the future Dunedin and all the communities that live within it, human or otherwise, need. It is your responsibility as councillors to ensure that this happens, to look after our city and those within it, and to be aspirational. Ka mihi nui, and I'm happy to take your questions.
We have a question from Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and kia ora, Chelsea, and thank you for that and that vision. Can I live there, please? It sounds amazing. Also, thank you for Forest and Birds, Mahi. Generally, the work they do is great. So I have 2 questions. You might only be allowed 1. We'll see what happens. There's a bit of a misconception often that everything in the biodiversity space falls on the ORC. So what are the things that do you think that are within Council's power to be able to improve and enhance the biodiversity we already have here in Otipoti?
Thank you, Councillor Walker. So I think we really need to be making a good investment into nature-based solutions like blue-green infrastructure, like I spoke about. So that's incorporating it into our Code of Subdivision and Development, into incentivising developers to start doing these things, whether it's via giving them a development contributions relief or a rates rebate or something like that. There's plenty of ways that we can get nature-based solutions into our infrastructure, not just for developing houses but for roads, in our parks and reserves, of course. There's a lot of ways that we can foster better biodiversity in the city that doesn't just fall to the regional council but falls to the local as well.
Well, very briefly, because
Yes,
follows on from that.
I'll follow that up. I've only got a couple of questions.
Okay.
So.
I think it was point 9 of your submission. You talked about the disappointment around our lack of vision and the going for the high-medium investment packages. Would you therefore be advocating for those to be back in? And I think one of them, part of that, the high package is the blue-green network. So I assume from that would be the desire.
Yeah, definitely. I think, to be we can be aspirational, but we need to actually be able to fund these things to actually get results. And I know it is quite a big expense up front, but it will pay off long term and it will give us resilience from a lot of these climate-based events that will be coming our way more and more into the future.
Great. Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thanks for your presentation. Actually, I want to go to point 8, and you talked about daylighting streams and a sponge city. It's currently not really actually active policy. On George Street we did it, but we don't really have it as an active policy in the council, and we haven't established our stormwater policy yet. So as we establish it, you are basically saying that when we do establish that policy, you're wanting us to be emphasising that quite strongly, much in the way potentially as Christchurch has done around the developments have done around the Heathcote.
Yeah, for sure, and it's been done by Greater Wellington Council quite recently as well over the last 5 years, and it's quite commonplace over in Europe as well, and it's been done by the Dutch and the Germans and stuff for a long amount of time, so we don't have to invent these things from scratch. It's stuff that has been done that we can take examples from and use it in a New Zealand context.
Thank you. Councillor Fiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr Mayor. Tēnā koe, Ms Magour. What would your advice be to politicians who use the government's intention to phase out well-beings, all the 4 well-beings out of the Local Government Act, and local politicians and decision makers would use that intent, policy intent, to not invest in your wonderful Dunedin future of the future?
I guess, you know, I mean, it's something I didn't prepare anything for it, but it's obviously something I wouldn't agree with. I think that those well-beings definitely need to stay in there. They all are very interlinked. They're those things that, you know, if you kind of work towards one of them, the other ones flow on from them as well, and they're all connected. And it is something that I think still needs to remain emphasised in the Local Government Act, yeah.
Thank you. Are there any further? Yes, Councillor Gary.
Seeing as time, I was interested in what the response of the people you mentioned who'd come from, was it 13 different countries, their response to their visit to Ōtepoti Dunedin.
Well, they only just arrived yesterday, and they said it was very cold this morning because a lot of them have come from the Northern Hemisphere. But no, they said they're really stoked to be here. They're taking a trip out to the albatross colony on Thursday for their field trip. I think the farthest south have held one of these was Christchurch. It's been ongoing for about 20 years now, these meetings of the parties. But yeah, they're really, really happy to be here. They love our seabirds and they love protecting them. So yeah, it's really cool to have them all here. Yeah.
Could I ask what other particular birds will they get to see while they're here, other than, naturally I expect they'll see the penguins, but flighted birds, what will they see?
Yeah, unfortunately I've kind of just missed the season for a lot of our seabirds. A lot of them just fledged early in May. Like we've got a TT colony, sort of shearwaters that we look after here, that all just fledged over the last couple of weeks. So they won't catch a whole lot of them. They'll get the odd albatross and petrel out at the Albatross Centre, but they have missed the boat for a lot of the really cool ones, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. That seems to have covered all the questions we have, so thank you very much for your submission. So next we have Mr. Daryl Sycamore from Terramark. So you have 5 minutes to speak and then 5 minutes for questions. And when you want to speak, you just press the button on the microphone in front of you, and you'll need to do that to speak again after you've had a question. There you go. There we go.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
So my name's Daryl Sycamore. I am a planner for Terramark Limited. I've been a planner for 20 years. I'm a member of the New Zealand Planning Institute, a certified hearings commissioner, and I'm also the chair of the Guardians of Lake Manapori, Monowai and Te Anau. So at Terramark's very grateful for the opportunity to speak to our submission today on the proposed development contributions. We're only here to talk about that rather than the 9-year plan. So look, as a starting point, most developers build homes as their commercial business. That's what they do for a job. It's what they do, and it's what they do well. If they don't, they fail. There is a tipping point in the market where, if it becomes unsustainable, they'll go elsewhere for better yields. And as an example, I understand that in Christchurch, it's $50,000 to $75,000 cheaper to build a medium density unit than compared to Dunedin. So that's a starting point, and that's quite a disincentive for development at the very start of any project. We also have a stable population in Dunedin. It's gone up 0% in the last 5 years, according to Infometrics Regional Environmental Profile. And over the next 24 years, DCC predicts the population is only going to go up 9,800 people. So that's not particularly many. And reiterating what Chelsea said before, we fully endorse what she's saying there. Population is a thing. The more people we have in our city, the more we can afford to provide the services that Chelsea was talking about. Tiramark considers the only credible way to manage cost, debt and increasing resilience relies on growing our population. The council must pull every lever possible to support the city and to support growth within the city. In my submission, Tiramark comments on the unique interpretation the DCC applies to in managing lead in soils as one other thing that disincentivises growth. This concern has just been sent to the city planning team in a letter last week on behalf of the 3 main survey firms. This further approach actually disincentivises growth quite substantially in the city. And it's one we're certainly looking for feedback in the future. And look, as an example, a 4-bedroom unit, a 4-unit development we're working on at the moment, that comes to about $32,000 extra cost per unit in terms of land remediation, consenting, and the such like. And so that comes to, that's actually more than the average New Zealand KiwiSaver balance, and those costs fall entirely on new home buyers. So those concerns up front impact yield, impact development, and that's really what impacts everything going on here. Aligned with the government's position, growth does pay for growth. Developers pay for installing all the new services in the site, road closures, traffic management, and the cost of new connections within road reserve. Development contributions are to part fund new assets and upgrades associated with the effects of that growth. Clutha District doesn't actually have any development contributions. And out of interest, they have 11 wastewater treatment plants serving 14 communities, and they also have 22 water schemes. Arguably, they have greater infrastructural issues in the council here, and also a far bigger issue in terms of population funding those issues. Rather than the sugar hit at the front end, Clutha Council recognises and gains value through encouraging development and the increased annual rates take. Their model seeks to build local economy and improve resilience through that method. And in my view, the development contribution proposal lacks detail also to make a full and robust assessment of those matters. The reports promote one option and only one option for the committee to consider and make a full informed decision. Those reports should have included an assessment of the economic effects on the community and population and things if the contributions were reduced to about 5,000 per unit, or even if they were removed altogether. And I suspect that if you were to do that analysis, it would actually be better off for the council in the long term and over the life of that asset. So it's for that reason that Tiramark opposes any increase in the development contribution levies. We certainly encourage council to commission a report to do an analysis on the overall financial effects on reducing it down to, say, 5,000 per lot, or reducing that altogether. We consider this approach, like Clutha, will stimulate growth, and the council will be financially better off over the life of the infrastructure assets. So that's my submission, Mr. Worship.
Great, thank you. I just have a question about the figures. You talked about Christchurch being 50 to 75k cheaper than Dunedin, and then you were talking about working on a 4-unit development that was $35,000 dearer.
Yes, that's correct.
So what is the comparison there? So you talked about a figure of 50 to 75 relative to Christchurch of a typical unit, and this 4-unit development, 35k more expensive. So could you just give us the relativity between those?
Yeah, I certainly can. And sorry, I didn't really articulate that particularly well. So in terms of building cost and labour supply and the cost of consenting, the feedback we have from developers is Dunedin's about $50,000 to $75,000 more expensive per unit. So that translates into the quality of the units that can be built, and often we hear feedback that the cladding isn't particularly high quality compared to Christchurch or whatever, but those developers actually have to build to a certain price point in the market, or they simply won't sell their house. So they have those costs up front. They build their houses often of a lesser quality than what Christchurch may. In terms of the point I made about the $35,000 per unit, that is an example that we're dealing with at the moment, and that relates to how the DCC treats lead in soils. And they apply the NES for contaminated soils in a way that, to the best of my knowledge, no other council in the country does. And I've talked to other staff members and other survey firms, and they agree. We just wrote a letter collectively, the 3 main survey firms, to the consents manager last week. We forwarded it to Councillor Barker is the chair of the Strategy and Planning Committee, just as an FYI. But that's something that, oh, my apologies. But that's certainly an upfront cost, which is potentially very expensive and quite a disincentive for developers. For a 1,000 square metre site, it could potentially be up to $200,000.
Okay. Right, next question, Councillor O'Malley.
It's kind of a follow-up to your question, but I think it's sort of been answered. But where do you get the number that Christchurch is $50,000 to $75,000 lower on DC charges? Because I would have thought our average charge is around about the $60,000 to $70,000 mark, which would mean that Christchurch is effectively free, if that number was correct.
Sorry, I probably didn't articulate that. That's the cost of the build and the sale price of them. So the cost of a build for a 3-bedroom medium density unit is about $50,000 to $75,000 cheaper than what it is in Dunedin City.
Would you be so kind as to the people who've given you that number to forward that number on how it was calculated to us?
Absolutely, I've seen numbers about that, so more than happy to.
My other question was, you mentioned Clutha District Council doesn't have development contribution, but in the ODT 2 days ago, they've just settled on a 16.04% rates increase. And obviously the relationship with development contribution and ratepayer burden is that DCs are supposed to drop ratepayer burden. So would you like to comment on the 16% rates increase in Clutha District and no development contribution?
Sure, well, look, that's pretty high increase, isn't it? And look, I guess that's representative of all the infrastructure that they manage and the small population they have. So you look, it's a difficult situation to be in. For any ratepayer, 16% is phenomenal, and especially for the lower end of the socioeconomic groups, that's a concern. You know, we're talking about this cycle of rates increases over these next 9 years. We're talking close to 10% for the first 3 years, and that's modelled to drop off. So, you know, again, for Dunedin City, that's quite significant in comparison anyway. Plus they have the development contributions to pay.
That was my point. Would you agree then the development contributions concept is that in fact it takes the burden to the development itself and it doesn't spread it across the ratepayer in general?
I certainly do agree with that, yes.
Great. Thank you. Councillor Hulan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A couple of quick questions. Your Clutha is probably not an overly good example because in the list of infrastructure, they're probably I think they're the worst in New Zealand. So that is a bit hard, challenging. But the one with Christchurch is really interesting. So as Councillor O'Malley said, it would be really good to see those figures. So a couple of questions. You mentioned, I'm aware of the lead stuff, and I was a bit concerned about it at the time. You're talking about the paint from the lead, aren't you? Is that correct? And the mitigation that you'd have to take if it was found, is that?
Yes, that is correct.
Yes.
It triggers a situation where it's recorded on your LIM as you're a contaminated site. If you remediate the property, you're still a remediated contaminated site. So when you go to on-sell your property afterwards, you're quite disadvantaged by that as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Did you mention something earlier about arable land as well?
No, I didn't know.
Okay. I think that covers questions. Oh, Councillor Gary.
So Sycamore, you talked about developers, and I just wonder if you could clarify, because there are different kinds of developers, aren't there? There's the big developers, and there's what I would frame as mom and pop developers who maybe subdivide their property and put a house on the back, or just subdivide their property and sell it. Who are you representing? Is there a mixture, mostly the former rather than the latter? Could you describe that, please?
Certainly, it relates to time. Now we have very few infill subdivisions and mum and pop developers. It just simply isn't economically viable for them to do that now. That's partially to do with the lead, but yeah, we don't have a lot of infill subdivision, 2-lot infill. They're mostly larger developments.
And if I may, just one further one, you'll appreciate the significance of lead in the soil. Would you, if you owned a property with lead in the soil, for example, grow a vegetable garden or food there? I know I wouldn't, but...
Yeah.
Look, I live in a house that's got old paint in it. It's a 1945 house, so it's captured by the provisions. We actually have raised gardens for our vegetables, but the standards are based on a 10% of the produce that your family consumes is grown in that lead-based soil, in that soil with the contamination. Look, I totally get the situation about lead and the concern, but to me it's a central government issue, and they should be driving a policy to all the councils in the country, not just one council acting in isolation. That's probably my biggest concern, because that's a disincentive that no other district has on developers.
Okay, thank you. And thank you very much for your submission. Thank you. And next, we have Mr. Mark Geddes of TL Surveys Limited. You just push the button, yep, to speak. Thank you.
Kia ora, and thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I'm Mark Geddes, and I am a professional surveyor with TL Survey Services. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity, because I think this really can have a big impact on our city. I would reference first and foremost 3 words from the draft development policy: fair, equitable and proportionate. I question this policy on all those. I'd also like to note that I don't believe that all growth should be attributed to development. I question why migration wasn't mentioned in that document at all, be it internal, domestically or international, and the impact that may have. I'd like to address how narrow or broad the focus of that document is, because I believe this is very narrow and based more on finances and doesn't really look at the wider element of development. Development is a process which, you know, is quite significant, yet the DCC's components of that are smaller or only part of that. I think really we need to look holistically at development as opposed to what we have here. So to be equitable, to be fair, to be impartial, is this fair to be looking at such a narrow focus? And I believe it's not. I think we really need to bring in other professionals who actually have an impact and have a view on this process. I believe the solution really lies in the tax system that we have here. We have tax brackets for a reason. People have more or less resources are taxed at a different level. I believe we should actually address, or one possible solution would be to actually address development contributions in the same way. Because to use the term that was used before, the mum-pop developers, the small ones, they do struggle because our economies of scale with large developments that simply aren't there. This is a disincentive to the smaller person. These are the people that are getting hurt more. And one area which I feel particularly strongly about is social housing. We have a shortage of that in this country, and we have a shortage of that in the city, as we see regularly in the paper. Social housing developments are generally not large. They can be, but are often not. The ones we have worked with in recent times aren't. They will be hit by these policies. Those few philanthropist developers, for lack of a better term, will also struggle. And we also have had an increasing market in the last 3 or 4 years where families have actually been subdividing for their own children because their children can't get into the property market, and situations where people are actually trying to subdivide to help with their retirement. These are the people that are getting hurt most. However, I do believe you've actually got it wrong, the policy, I should say, has got it wrong at the top end too, because I question figures in here. There is not enough information here to actually interrogate the integrity of these figures in the additional document that was supplied after these submissions initially closed. Another way to look at the proportion element is the proportion of the total subdivision costs. And I think what we see is a disproportionate rise in development contributions. And we haven't seen an explanation in that document as to why that is growing greater than it has with the previous rises. I don't dispute that development contributions are required, but I believe the level they're being applied at here is wrong, or the model of delivery is wrong. I think a flow-on effect of this too is some other businesses we have in town. If you're hurting the smaller end because of the lack of economy of scale they have, because there are fixed costs for a large or a smaller developer, I think you're also hurting in part, the policy, I beg your pardon, is hurting in part the smaller contractors, the smaller survey firms, the smaller associated businesses in general, because that's where they get some of their work from. I would agree that infill subdivision isn't what it was some time ago, but our firm still does quite a bit of it. And we have had people struggle with the level of contributions as it is when they're looking for their family. And again, I question how we're actually going to make social housing economic if we're adding more cost at that level. But as I say, I see a problem, but I think it would be wrong for me not to propose the solution. So, as I intimated, I believe the secret's in the tax system and how we have a tiered approach. I believe that we could also do that here, and this is just a guideline. I'd be happy to discuss it further. But we have different tiers of development contributions, say 1 to 6 lot, which may be, say, smaller, taking the mom and pop developer, if you will, taking in some of the social housing, taking in some of those people that are doing it more on a family basis rather than a commercial basis. Now, as I say, I think we need to review development contributions at all levels because I'm not convinced at the top level. Having said that, I've introduced in my proposal, and I hope you have or had the opportunity to read it, a suggestion really with 4 tiers, and I'm open to other suggestions on that. Because I see the current policy where we're applying the same fee to all people, regardless if you've got 2-lot subdivision or a 600-lot subdivision, as being disproportionate, as not being fair. And on the point of fairness too, is it right for someone in Wakuiti or Middlemarch to be incurring such huge costs at relatively short notice given the notification of this policy, compared with someone in, say, Allington who has a much lesser fee? That's a question I will leave with you. The question of fairness is a subjective one, I freely admit, but it's my opinion that this is not fair, that I question the equitable nature of it, and I certainly don't think it's proportionate based on the size of potential developments where the smaller people are going to be proportionately paying more. I thank you for the opportunity, but I see this as a bit like Swiss cheese in the sense that I don't buy Swiss cheese, I don't want to pay for the holes in it. I see these documents as having holes in them too, so I don't think the city should be paying for them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have questions. Councillor Hulan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Have you got concerns that if this went ahead, your, developers that you might work with or people who do housing in the city might leave our city?
Thank you for the question. I believe in some cases, yes, but I think in many cases, I think they'll look for alternative areas of investment, those that have the funds, and that may not necessarily be investments within our city. So it may be people who are looking from here elsewhere. It's hard for me to say that absolutely, but I think it'll be a disincentive, and what I think we'll see is probably a cooling, this is just my opinion, of maybe 3 or 4 years until, be it people's ability to fund these things, people's salaries actually kind of catch up. So I think we'll see a cooling in the market as a result.
Oh, sorry. And a follow-up to that, do you think that will follow on, if these costs go through, that house prices will increase?
Yes, and I think... Thank you very much. Yes, I believe they will, because I believe that those who are developing will just pass these costs on. So we will see a proportionate rise in costs, which is, again, not helping those trying to enter the market. And I don't think it's probably going to have an overall benefit, even be it at the house and land package or the BLM package. It will. I see this being added on regardless of which scenario you're looking at there.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mark, for coming in and for your considered submission. Can I just check with you, as I did with Daryl, around the TL services and the proportion of mom and pop developers versus the large firms, first of all?
Yes, certainly. As a percentage, we probably have a slightly higher percentage because we are a slightly smaller firm. But I don't doubt that both Daryl's firm now do operate in different markets. We have both have quite diverse client bases. It would have an impact on other surveying engineering firms and related contractors and the likes as well.
And just for clarity, what you're proposing is you do understand that there needs to be development contributions, because you've said that, but you're suggesting bans and a staggered approach.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. Councillor Gilbert.
Thank you, and thank you on a couple of things. A, for coming in, and B, for not only coming with here's a problem, but also here's a solution. It's always nice when that happens. So on your solution, are you familiar or aware of any areas where the DCs are done on that tiered thing? I mean, obviously you use the tax system as an example, but are you familiar with either in New Zealand or elsewhere where it's done?
That is a fair question, and no, I'm not. We deal with, I think, 9 local authorities, but 7 at that sort of level, and we certainly don't have that applied. But again, as Darryl suggested, there are different approaches to development contributions regardless, but at the moment they are applied in a similar manner, sometimes with different justifications or different levels of payment, as it were, within those. So no, I don't know of another one, but I don't think that's the reason why we can't be leaders in that area.
No, it's nice though that if somebody's already invented the wheel, it'd be nice to pick their design.
Absolutely. If someone else has got a model like that and we can work off it and it can save us money and time, I absolutely agree.
Great. Do we have Councillor Houlihan?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just on that, when you deal with a lot of different authorities, how do we rank in DCs? Are we the highest?
Obviously, we have different levels of development contributions depending on different activities or zones, and at the moment we have such a huge range in Dunedin, it's hard to make a direct comparison. What I would say is that there are a couple of councils which have a, let's say, a notably different approach, and I would suggest that Queenstown Lakes is one, if you're wanting to look at the higher end, is probably one to compare to. I take the points you made before about Clutha District, but I also support some of the things that Darryl said in terms of their approach, where they charge a connection fee, which is site-specific as well, which I think is a very good way of doing it. And they have the resources to do that, and I think we probably do too within Dunedin City. Central Otago is probably in the middle ground. They are assessing how they do things in terms of infrastructure. We haven't heard that they're going to necessarily change their development contribution per se, but so some of these are kind of, I suppose, things that we need to watch as well. So I can't give you a definitive answer in terms of all districts, but there are differences. But we would probably be increasingly at the we're currently probably in the mid to upper range. I would suggest this would send us to the upper range, in my opinion.
Great. Councillor Millie.
Thanks. I don't know if you've got it on, because I know that list, but I don't have it in front of me. What's the Dunedin Metro DC? Can you do?
Oh, this is that
Button there.
Sorry, I believe the current one for brownfields, I think off the top of my head, because I don't actually have that document, I've got the infrastructure document here, is I think for brownfields I think it's about 15,600 plus GST, and I think it's about 16,500 for greenfields. I do actually agree that the brownfields and greenfields should be distinguished, because I do think that we do need to protect the urban fringe, as it were, or the rural areas. And I do actually support what Variation 2 did in encouraging infill where possible. I should also add that I think this development contribution, and this probably supplements what Darryl said, is actually going to hurt the intent of Variation 2 in terms of trying to actually make more sites available, encourage private developers who actually have that available land within their own holdings, because we do have a bit of a patchwork quilt of land holdings here as opposed to some countries.
My point would be that I just got something in front of me here where Christchurch is changing its housing unit equivalent charge from 8,000 back in 2021 to 29,000 in the new one, which is a tripling of the DC. So my question really is, I know we're actually pretty much doing the same thing. What do you think, sort of to Councillor Houlihan's line, have we gone way out of line and our DC's gone like through the roof compared to anybody else, or, because I think Queenstown is around 30,000 mark now. So my question really is, given that they are that, and I think paperwork I have in front of me from a thing is 23,000 as we were targeting, are we out of line with these cities if Christchurch is at 29 and Queenstown's at 33?
Well, I think that is a fair question, but I think we've also all got to step back and realise that we've got quite different circumstances and different environments to deal with there. Christchurch, obviously, post-earthquake has some issues. Queenstown has obvious issues that none of us really want with their limited space, their tourist issues, sorry. I love having tourists here, but they have issues we don't. In terms of are we out of kilter with those. I think possibly a little bit, but I also suggest one other alternative, and while I haven't got it in my submission, if I may, the other option, and we thought this might actually happen when we discussed this within our firm 3-4 months ago before we saw the policy, was that it might be a similar approach to what had happened with rates, where there might be, say, 5 or 10%, then the next year an adjustment. That way you can actually, dare I say it, give some sort of confidence or idea to developers of what they might expect. And it's probably the sort of thing which actually means you can plan developments at different levels, be it social, be it small mum and pup, be it big developments, in a better way in terms of finance. Because one problem we actually have is that you have to secure finance sometimes quite a way in advance of a policy coming in a matter of a month or so's notice.
Yes.
So basically you're saying whatever your position is on the actual quantum in the end, you're saying a phasing in approach would be allowing those who are affected by it to respond to it in a reasonable manner.
Correct. I do believe the proposed figures of 23.5, I think it is, as you suggest, for brownfields, and I think it's 27-ish for greenfields. I think that is a little high, and I would propose something smaller. But in saying that, I don't get to see exactly how these numbers were generated. So I don't envy the position this council has in terms of balancing the books and projecting forward. So yes, I would prefer a tiered approach. What I'd also suggest though is by doing a tiered approach, we can assess as we go. And as a result, we may say, this is too high, this is too low, but we give warning to people, which I think is far more reasonable to the general public.
Okay, fantastic. Look, we've covered questions, so thank you very much, Mr. Geddes. Thank you for coming along and making your submission.
Thank you.
Gentlemen. That covers our submitters, and that concludes the meeting. Thank you very much for coming along. Well done, councillors.